Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello, and welcome to episode 79. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm joined today by holistic health practitioner Dr. Leslie Kasanoff. Her experience includes more than 2 decades as a chiropractor, and before that, she spent 10 years as a medical laboratory scientist. Most recently, Dr. Leslie has combined her vast experience and expertise to focus on health coaching and consulting, providing drugless solutions for women's health and wellness challenges. Dr. Leslie follows her own good advice. She eats a whole food, plant-based diet, gets most of her exercise through activities she loves, like riding her bike, and loves learning new things and taking on new challenges. We discuss a broad array of topics, and I learned so much, especially the impact of certain foods on our hormone levels and how the microbiome functions as a second brain. Here's what we cover: how we can encourage the body's optimal state of self-healing, why some women feel the impact of menopause and how to ease the symptoms, the importance of good gut health, the microbiome's role in keeping our immune system functioning well, and what we can do to age with vitality. We end this episode with our Dose of Inspiration segment, where Dr. Leslie shares some of the things that are lighting her up these days. And as always, I'll put links to Dr. Leslie's contact information and a free offer she has for the listeners of this podcast. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Dr. Leslie, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
So please share a bit about who you are and what you do.
So I am a health and wellness coach and consultant, and I've morphed into this after being what I'd term a holistic chiropractor for 25 years. And then for 10 years before that, I was a medical lab scientist. So this gives me the opportunity to combine both that more holistic part of me with that kind of science geeky thing that loves going down the tunnel and loves being able to do the research to help people. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people that I help are women over 40 and people with chronic diseases that don't want to have to take a lot of medication, want to resolve their problems more naturally. Mm-hmm. So we do that with a combination of healthy eating and some lifestyle changes and some working with their gut and their environment and a few other things here and there and combining it all in a package.
Perfect. And, I have a soft spot for chiropractors because my dad practiced before I was born. So that was a long, long time ago. But you're the first chiropractor that we've had on the show. So I'm curious, what drove your decision to become a chiropractor? Because you were in the medical field, right?
Right. So I did actually start out as a medical lab scientist. And one of the very last things that I had to do, actually, while I was still a student doing my internship, one of the very last things that I had to do was I had to assist at the bedside for a bone marrow biopsy. And basically my job was pretty simple. I just, stood there when the doctor got the sample. I made the requisite microscope slides and brought those and the sample back to the lab. But the thing that I was not prepared for that happened in that room was, first of all, I walked into that room and the little old lady that was laying in the bed looked to my 22-year-old eyes like she was 110. Mm. And I don't know how old she was. And it was just a horrendous experience. Mm. They don't use any kind of anesthetic because once you penetrate bone, there is nothing you can do to anesthetize. Yeah. And I just saw that look on your face with that reality of penetrating.
For those listening, I'm horrified.
Yes. Anyway, it was, I mean, it was a horrendous experience, blood curdling screams that just sucked all the energy out of the room, just horrible. And so he gets that sample, he hands it to me, I make the slides, I bring it back to the lab, I tell the senior tech about this poor little old lady, and she looks at me and she says, but Leslie, they don't even treat leukemia in patients that old.
Mm.
And my immediate question was, what the hell am I doing here?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, 22-year-old brain was a lot more
Spirited.
Yeah, spirited than that. And I did go on to complete my studies. I was literally about 3 months from graduation after a 5-year program. So, so I did complete that. It did serve me as a career for a few years, but I started researching then. And I knew that light bulb went on, and then the next light bulb went on, and the light bulb that went on was, you can't do anything in the position that you're in or the position that you could ever hope to be in, grow into from where you are now. You can't do anything to alter that paradigm. The only way you're going to alter that paradigm is to alter it for individuals in a different setting.
Wow. That is incredibly powerful. And how long did it take you? You said you were a medical tech for a number of years. Were you going to school at that time? Just help me with the timeline a little bit.
Basically, I graduated and I worked for a year, and then I actually took off on a cross-country bicycle trip after that.
Okay, that I want to hear about.
Yeah, and that was all about, finding myself and kind of figuring things out, and finally settled on the central coast of California. And eventually, I actually didn't go back to school for about another 4 or 5 years after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But there was a shift in consciousness of some sort. And you knew,
yeah.
I think at that young age to be able to say, I'm just going to take off and try to figure this out. So what were some of the surprises along the way that kind of unfolded that maybe shaped your destiny in a way that you didn't think about before you embarked?
That's a really good question, because on the one hand, I took off to kind of get away from everything, which I obviously did on a bicycle, cycling through mountains and seashores and everything else. I don't know if there's any one thing that ever happened, but I did learn a lot about that whole independence versus interdependence.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was with a group of people, and there were stories to be told around that. And a guy that decided that he wasn't going to ride to the campsite one night and had the tent with him. So when we saw him the next day, it was like, can we have our tent back, please?
A lot about teamwork, or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
So shifting from medical to more holistic, can you speak to the body's natural propensity toward optimizing wellness, toward self-healing, toward self-correcting?
Mm-hmm. Well, you may have heard some of these kinds of things having been brought up with a dad who was a chiropractor. Chiropractic is very strong in the idea that the body is self-healing and self-correcting. And if you look at it, it's like, if you cut your arm, you don't have to tell it what to do. It knows. And it knows that internally too. And one of the things that, we kind of laugh at in chiropractic is like, you don't have high blood pressure because of a shortage of high blood pressure medication. It's the whole cause and effect thing. We're not treating cause and effect in medicine. And so what chiropractic does, what natural forms of healing do, is more about getting back to that root and and looking more at what is the cause. Chiropractic says that the cause is basically a misconnection between the nervous system and the rest of the body. And so it opens up the nervous system through adjusting the spine and getting things back in alignment. And then the whole thing about nutrition and exercise and adding the right food and adding natural things rather than chemically derived manufactured things.
Mm-hmm. So tell me what you've learned about your own health and well-being along the way. What's influenced your practice?
Yeah, well, we all learn by doing to a large extent. Right out there with everybody else. I've made the same mistakes everybody else has. I actually lost my gallbladder because I was eating too much fatty garbage and then still didn't learn that lesson and continued eating it. And it wasn't really until the whole perimenopause thing set in that I really said, let's back off of all this, why are you consuming the milk of an animal that weighs 1,000 pounds? Mm-hmm. Not a very healthful thing for a 120-pound human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So along the way, you've made adjustments.
Yeah.
And you mentioned perimenopausal and that you work with women like that. If you had to give them some advice as to either if they're preparing for it and they're in the middle of it, what are some things that you might be able to recommend?
Well, the whole perimenopause thing in the society is a real dilemma because we've been conditioned to think that there's nothing we can do about it, which there's nothing further from the truth than that. And our diets have made it really, really difficult. Basically, what people don't understand about their hormones is that your hormones, like most of the other things in your body, are very much determined by what's on the end of your fork.
Mm.
And so there's a lot that you can do with beginning to balance those hormones by paying more attention to that. And, I mentioned earlier about dairy. Well, when you take a look at it, dairy is loaded with hormones because it does come from a cow that, like I said, weighs 1,000 pounds. And basically what you're doing is you're giving yourself the fluid that cow is designed to feed to its baby calf to turn it from a cute little 40-pound calf into a 1,000-pound animal in a year. It has tons of growth factors and hormones and estrogen and things in it that are not appropriate for humans of any age to be consuming.
And so these are natural hormones you're talking about, but then on top of that, there could be other things.
Exactly.
That we ingest as well, right?
Right. There is that whole thing with the fact that they also give those animals even more hormones so that they can make more milk.
So we're already imbalanced from an estrogen standpoint, and then we're not taking into account what we're ingesting.
Right.
And then are there other things that are high in estrogen as well?
Well, dairy is definitely the worst. Another thing that's also really high in estrogen that kind of surprises most people is eggs and chicken. Now, the eggs might not surprise you too much, but chicken usually surprises people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's funny how we don't equate those for some reason, because when we think estrogen, we think milk related because we're mammals. Mm-hmm. Well, the fact of the matter is that a chicken lays an egg every day of its life. You need a hell of a lot of estrogen to do that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the things that we may think that are healthy, having more eggs, having more chicken breast, we actually it's very counter.
Yeah, exactly.
So, my next question is why some women feel the effects while others don't, but that could play a big part in it, right?
It does. The whole diet thing plays a big part, but the other thing that also plays a big part, and I apologize if anybody's going to get offended by this, but it's a fact of the matter, is weight and fat. Mm. Because fat cells make an enzyme called aromatase. And what aromatase does is it actually converts other hormones into estrogen. So you've got this kind of hormone manufacturing machine in all of your fat cells that's producing even more estrogen. And then what does estrogen do? One of the byproducts of increased estrogen production is the laying down of more fat. So you get into this whole vicious circle. So one of the things that I really advise women to do is to try and get down to more of their ideal weight before the whole perimenopause thing starts. And they're going to have a lot less problems.
Do you find that those that are able to do that once menopause hits, they're able to be in that vicinity weight wise? Because I know afterwards sometimes that's an issue where it feels like there's a slowing of the metabolism. If that's the reason or not, I don't know, but that's kind of the belief. So do you find that if people do the work beforehand, it's not only easier to get through it, but also afterwards?
It's funny that you bring it up in that context, because actually now that I'm through it and I know more women who have been through it, it seems like there's a period of time around the time you go through the process that there tends to be a weight gain. And I think everybody's different, maybe because we're all dealing with it differently. But a lot of us have also found that after you go through all that it's not as bad. So when I was going through the whole perimenopause thing, I think I gained and lost the same 15 pounds probably 5 times. 5 times in 10 years.
Right.
But then after all that, I dropped it all, and I dropped another 10 pounds on top of that.
There's light at the end of the tunnel, lady.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. I think that the biggest disservice we do to ourselves a lot of times is thinking that what everybody else told us is true and that's the way it has to be.
It's a relief for a lot of people to know that, hey, if they are struggling at a point in time, that there is an end and it's actually a beginning.
Yeah, right. And within that, it's, there's an end, but it doesn't happen without you taking action. It's like, it doesn't just go away, and people have a harder time figuring out what's best for their body, which is, sometimes where that coaching comes in, consulting with somebody like myself, because it is variable.
So that just brings up, this idea of mindset and how we're intending to experience something like that. So do you work with your clients around that as well?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. Because they need that little bit of success to breed more success. So, and everybody is different in that realm. So it's a matter of figuring out what's going to work for them.
That's great. I heard you speak about our second brain, which is our microbiome, and how important it is to support good gut health. So I was wondering if you could share some thoughts with our listeners on that topic.
Sure. We're finding out more and more every single day about the gut microbiome and how intricately it's connected with the rest of everything else that goes on. And it's now starting to look like most of our hormones aren't actually made by our brain, like we always thought they were. Most of them are actually made by our gut microbiome, and then they're absorbed into our system. So, all of your neurotransmitters that dictate your moods, whether you're angry or sad or happy or hungry or depressed or whatever, all those neurotransmitters are actually made by your gut flora.
Interesting.
And your gut flora, there's, for lack of easier terms, there's good guys and bad guys. And the good guy gut microbiome flora like the same food that is good for your body, namely your fruits, your vegetables, your beans, and your complex carbos. And so that's what they eat, and that's what they thrive on. And that's what, when you're eating those things, you're feeding them. And that in turn helps feed you the appropriate amount of the appropriate hormones. On the other side of the coin, if you're eating animal foods and a lot of fat, and things of that nature every single day, you're feeding the bad guys that cause inflammation and that upset all that balance and don't make all those hormones that you need to keep your body in balance.
Interesting. And what's the role, the microbiome's role in keeping our immune system functioning well?
It's very intricately connected, and we're still parsing out a lot of how all that interacts together. There's still so much that we don't know, but there's a definite connection between having a healthy gut microbiome and your immune system.
Mm-hmm. So one of the best things that we can do around these times is, you said, it's at the end of our fork.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to say within all this, because some people get turned off very easily, they make assumptions. I'm not saying that people necessarily need to be vegan. Okay. What I'm saying is that if you're not eating animal food on a daily basis, it's going to be a lot easier for your body to balance itself. And the other thing that I'm saying is that if you look around the world, in places where people live longer, healthier than we do. So when you're talking about the Okinawans and the Sardinians in Italy, and you might be familiar with the Blue Zone regions of the world, the Icarians in Greece. You look at those cultures and they mainly eat whole complex carbos and fruits and veggies, and they may have a little bit of animal products, but they don't have the quantity that we do, and both the quantity in numbers of times per day and the quantity in amounts that we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a condiment, whereas with the American diet, it's like the main part of the diet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for them too, it's smaller meals, smaller bits to digest throughout the day, and not as often. Is that fair?
I would say, generally speaking, yeah. It's like, if you look at a traditional Sardinian meal or something, they may have some goat cheese or some goat meat in that meal, but they're not having the amount that we have. And if you look at places like in Africa where they eat more traditional diets, they're splitting, a 6-ounce piece of meat can feed a family a meal.
One more question on the microbiome, and that's the impact that sterilizing our environments over this past year, beyond the good hygiene. What might the impact be when we start to emerge more after having exposed ourselves to a bunch of antibacterial products?
That's a whole bag of worms in and of itself. Because not only are we damaging our microbiome that's part of our skin, we're also ingesting a lot of that stuff because we're breathing it, and we're sterilizing. A lot of people are sterilizing a lot of the things that they're cooking on and cooking in, and you're going to be getting micro amounts of that as you ingest it as well. So all that stuff is going to be affecting multiple parts of our microbiome, not just our skin microbiome. And there's so much that we don't know, but the thing that we do know is, just going back to, there have been so many studies over the past 20, 30 years that basically show that the children who play in the dirt are healthier than the children whose parents run and go wash the plastic toy before they hand it back to them every single time. It's like people have to kind of parse out what works for them. But there's so much fear out there right now that is, I think, out of proportion with what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And that's a topic in itself, right? Of what that does to the nervous system, and then in turn,
Exactly.
impact our immune system, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
I'm curious to know your wellness routines these days as far as exercise and moving. You said you had done this amazing bike trip, and I think there may have been one recently, right? If I recall from your blog that you took a little road trip.
Yeah, I did. I took most of the month of June and did about 600 miles in Colorado and Utah and Montana.
Nice. Good for you.
Yeah,
That's awesome. And then on a just when you're home, your normal routine, is it walking? Is it swimming? Is it biking?
it's mostly biking as far as my general exercise. Yeah, I try to ride at least 4 days a week. I That's my main form of aerobic workout. I do supplement that with doing some strengthening work and some stretching work and that kind of thing, that I probably don't do as regularly as I should, but
To follow doctor's orders there.
actually, I've been doing better with some of that more recently. So, it waxes and wanes because it's not as much. It doesn't give me as much of that. When I get on the bicycle, and it just gives me that feeling of freedom. And it doesn't have to take up a ton of time. It's like one of the things that I've gotten used to doing lately is when I get up in the morning, usually after I take the dog out, one of the things that I'll do is I'll do like 15 push-ups and 25 sit-ups. And it takes all of 5 minutes,
Yep.
and it's done for the day.
Yep.
And it's not something that I really enjoy doing,
Sure.
but I just do it because I know that my body needs to keep up with those muscles. I get plenty of lower body workout. I don't have to worry about that so much. But the other never hurts.
Especially having that core strength as we all get older. And that was actually my last question here about how do we age with vitality?
Yeah.
Because I know that you have these foundations of empathy and compassion for your patients, as well as a love of science. But the last one is living life to the fullest, which I just think is amazingly lovely. So share with our listeners how they might feel or how possible it is to feel more engaged as we age.
It very much ties in with a lot of things. First of all, when you're eating more healthfully, you don't get a lot of those blood sugar surges and dips and that kind of thing. So that's going to help. Exercise really helps feed fresh energy into your brain. It feeds fresh blood flow into your brain, so that's good. The social aspect, is huge. As far as like on a physical basis, I tell people that basically, they need to be doing stretching, strengthening, aerobic workout, and balance workout. And if they can do those things on a regular basis, then they're going to keep things going in the right direction as long as they can.
And there's a lot of leeway there, right?
Yeah.
You can check those boxes off in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can. And one of the things that checks them off really better, checks more of them off more quickly, is yoga, because it works with the balance and the flexibility and the strength.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that's where a lot of your clients kind of migrate toward as they get older, that it's less of the running and all of that stuff and more of that yoga like activities or tai chi or something like that?
Yeah, it can. It depends on the person. And those kinds of things work very well in a classroom setting. So there's your social aspect. Yeah.
Nice. Love it. I was listening to something today, and they were saying how a lot of these big companies, Apple in particular, has really doubled down on whether you like wearables or not. This seems to be a trend for the future of trying to spot disease earlier in the process through technology. And it just made me pause. We can do that. All of the things that you have been talking about is feeling how your own body feels, whether it is perimenopause or whether it is as we're getting older and we're deciding what activity to do to check those broad boxes, that we can kind of guide ourselves to what feels better.
Exactly. Spend a little bit of time in quiet solitude, and you'll figure out what you need to allow you to feel more youthful, more invigorated.
Hear, hear. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So we like to wrap up these episodes with what we call a dose of inspiration. It's just a quick Q&A to have our listeners get to know you a little bit.
Sure.
So the first question is, what is a favorite wellness practice or a recent wellness win?
Well, on a physical basis, it's the cycling, but also on a mental emotional basis, it's always continuing to learn and continuing to inspire others, be in contact with others. Yeah.
I love that. That's a great answer. Love it. How about a recent struggle in a place where you were focusing your wellness efforts?
For me, that is probably the discipline around getting to bed at a decent hour so that I can get up at the hour I need to and have the energy that I want to have in the morning. And that's always been a struggle for me.
Interesting. What new experience or new thing are you looking forward to trying?
Well, I actually have a milestone birthday coming up in just a couple of days. And I wanted to do something that I haven't done before. And this isn't a big thing, but it is something I haven't done before. I'm going paddleboarding with a friend.
Good for you. Yay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it. Envision the perfect road trip. Where do you go? What do you do?
Where do I go? What do I do? Well, first of all, the mode of transportation would be my bicycle.
Fair enough.
And so that's a lot of the what do I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can bike anywhere in the world. Where would you go?
Well, I'm still waiting to do my European bike tour that was interrupted by COVID last summer.
Okay.
Yeah. The trip that I had planned, which I would still love to do when I can, is about 4,500 miles, actually, if I do the whole thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Europe isn't exactly flat either.
Yeah. And this is actually a north-south route.
Mm.
It actually starts up at the very north end of Norway in a place called Nordkapp, which is the northernmost point in Norway. It actually goes all the way down through the Italian peninsula.
Beautiful. How long does it take to do something like that?
It would probably take about 4 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So it would involve doing some creative things as far as visas and that kind of thing.
And having had the experience, to keep your own tent. Don't give the tent away.
Yeah.
What has you feeling inspired these days? What's lighting you up?
I'm actually doing a coaching certification program. Having moved from being in the clinical setting for 25 years and having basically all the medical knowledge and the nutrition knowledge and the fitness knowledge and all that kind of stuff, I didn't really, quote unquote, need to have a coaching certification to move into coaching. Sure. But there are skills that I wanted to develop in terms of being able to help people go from point A to point B that were not my core skills. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, because it's a very different conversation being a coach than it is giving somebody advice in a clinical setting.
Absolutely. I was speaking to a retired nurse turned coach. Mm-hmm. And she said people know what they need to do, whether they want to admit it or not. It's how.
Exactly.
How do I fit it into my life? How do I do this? How do I keep motivated? How? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah. I can certainly understand that, yes, I have all of this knowledge, but how do I make it accessible?
Right.
To somebody who's coming for me for some accountability.
How do I make it accessible? And how do I make it accessible in a way that I'm not telling them, you should do this. Mm-hmm. because they're much more likely to maintain that if they can figure out for themselves why they want to do that, and they can internalize that change.
Yes, beautifully said.
So that's a lot of what I'm learning now that's really lighting me up.
Nice. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And then the last one, what has you optimistic about the future?
That might be a tough one to answer these days. I think the thing that has me up, I'll say it this way: the less I listen to the news, the more I'm able to keep my optimism.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean I'm burying my head in the sand, but that does mean I'm not going down that tunnel multiple times per day.
That's self-care.
It is.
You're being very discerning with your boundaries, and good for you. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us. We have the ability to close that door. And as you say, not to bury your head in the sand, but to take good care of yourself, of your soul.
Yeah.
So tell me, what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you? Where can they find you?
Well, my website is drlesliek.com. My Instagram is dr.lesliek. And I have a public Facebook group that's Vibrant Health Over 40. And one of the other things that I do is I can offer them a little freebie.
Okay, great.
If they text the word wellness to the number 41259 and then follow the prompts, they will get 30 free days of inspirational messages that are nutrition and health related. And they'll also get a short little phone call from me before they get started on that.
Lovely. I love it.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'll link all of that stuff up in the show notes. And such an inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.